of mitzvot in general, the mitzvot aseh and the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, and I presented the idea that when the mitzvot are parallel, where the aseh is the mirror image of the lo ta'aseh, that there's good reason to treat the mitzvot aseh as being the conceptual and value-based mirror image of the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, and the Rambam insists on counting them both as mitzvot, the positive and the negative, to emphasize the need to engage with the mitzvot aseh. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week, we were looking at the mitzvah of Shabbat as presented in the Aseret Dibrot, and we developed the principle that Rambam says overtly that ideas need to be tied to actions for them to be refined, retained, and rooted and spread among the people. Okay. We also continued looking at the Aseret Dibrot structurally. The Aseret Dibrot starts with Anochi Hashem Elohecha, which Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvot turns into Mitzvot Aseh number 1, belief in a God. Mitzvot Aseh number 2 is the unity and the uniqueness of God. They're very much two parts of the same mitzvah, belief in the unique God, and that mitzvah finds expression in the opening sentence of Shema, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. This is the God of Israel who is unique. And indeed, as we establish the principle that abstract ideas need to be tied to an action, indeed, in the Sefer Mitzvot, I believe it's number 6, Mitzvot Aseh, is that we are required to say Kriyat Shema twice a day. Okay. Today, I want to look at Mitzvot Aseh number 3 and 4. The mitzvot, and we're going to see the text, to Ahavat Hashem and Yirat Hashem, the love and fear of God. And once we understand what Rambam is doing there, I think we will have a tremendous appreciation for Rambam's whole theology, and we will have a new and significantly better understanding of what Rambam is doing in his whole enterprise of the Ta'amei HaMitzvot, the what we can call the reasons for the mitzvot, which he engages in a very large fraction of the Moreh Nevuchim. It's about half of the third section. The third section itself is half the book. It comes out to be almost a quarter of the Moreh Nevuchim is devoted to this, and it is very, very poorly understood. I think it's not an exaggeration to suggest that everyone who has written on the subject, except for one or two people who you've never heard of, completely misunderstood what Rambam is doing. And I think once we understand what Rambam is doing with Ta'amei HaMitzvot, if I do this correctly, we will have a completely new understanding of what we're doing when we perform mitzvot. That's quite a large leap that I'm taking here, but I've taken it upon myself to try to do that. We said that the opening sentence of the Shema is a active engagement with the first two mitzvot, to believe that there is a God and his unity, Shema and Echad. I want to argue that the next two mitzvot in the Rambam's Yad, in the Rambam Sefer Mitzvot, Ahava and Yirat Hashem, are actually the continuation of the Shema, and it is the heart of his philosophy. The Avat Hashem, that's easy. V'avta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nefshecha v'chol meodecha. V'hayu hadivreim ha'ela asher anechi mitzavecha Hashem, I'm going to argue, is the application in real life of Yirat Hashem, which we have to talk about. Before we do this, I want to take a step back. I said, and it's almost slanderous that I'm saying this, but it's true anyway, that almost everyone who's written on the subject has misunderstood what the Rambam is doing in his Tamei Mitzvot. I'll start with the tour in his Code of Jewish Law in Yeridea. Kuf Pei Aleph. He says, we don't need Tamei Mitzvot. He's clearly addressing Rambam, and he's clearly rejecting it. We don't need Tamei Mitzvot because we fulfill the king's command and don't ask questions. So says the Tur in addressing why we do mitzvot. He's rejecting the very idea of having Tamei Mitzvot. I would like to quote Rav Soloveitchik, who was very critical of the Rambam's Tamei Mitzvot in the Yad, and as well as in the Moreh Nevuchim. And I think hostile is a better word. He said, the Rambam's Tamei Mitzvot leave me cold. In his halachic mind, he wrote, that's just a quote that he said, he wrote that the Tamei Mitzvot of the Rambam neither edify nor inspire the religious consciousness. He's rejecting it outright. He says Rambam's Tamei Mitzvot are valueless for the religious interests we have most at heart. I think he's outright rejecting what the Rambam is doing. And why is he doing that? Because he doesn't understand what the Rambam is doing. And I'm going to explain why he doesn't understand that. I think for most of us, certainly in our youth, we were introduced to Tamei HaMitzvot by way of the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch goes through every mitzvah in the Torah, explains where the source pasuk is. He gives an explanation of why, and he adds all sorts of little details like what, when it applies, who it applies to. But the Sefer HaChinuch is the heart of the Sefer HaChinuch is his pithy, and I don't mean that as an insult, his pithy explanations of why we have these mitzvot. It's a real problem. Mark, you there? Yeah, Mark, can you mute everyone but me?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll do that right now.
Thank you. Okay. So the chinuch of why, I hope I'm not muted. Okay. He gives simplistic explanations of why we do each of the mitzvot. And if that's all you knew about Tamei Mitzvot, of course you reject it. Once you got to a certain age where you understood there's got to be more than this. And because the Sefer HaChinuch is so very closely devoted to the Rambam's explication of the mitzvot, we simply assume that the Chinuch's Tamei Mitzvot are merely paraphrases of what the Rambam writes in the Moreh Nevuchim. But it's not true. And I'm going to demonstrate that, and hopefully you'll understand better where we need to go with it. Rambam explains, this is in the third section of the Moreh Nevuchim. Let's take a look at it. In the third section of Musar-Avicha, in his opening chapter of opening chapters of his explication of the Tamei Mitzvot, he's explaining why he's assigning Tamei Mitzvot and addressing the objection of people who object to what he's doing because they objected to when other people did it as well. He says that the Tamei Mitzvot are necessary. They're inevitable because we have intelligence. And it is inconceivable that God gave us the intelligence only for us to set it aside and refuse to use it. He cites the pasuk, the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, that first of all, that the mitzvot are L'tov lanu kol hayamim l'chayotenu kayom hazeh, and he adds earlier in Sefer Dvarim, Asher yishmu'un et kol hachukim ha'ele ve'amaru, he's talking about the goyim, rak am chacham v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh. The very purpose of the mitzvot, one of the purposes, is that the goyim should look at the way we perform the mitzvot and say, what a wise and majestic nation. Well, if the mitzvot are unintelligible, then watching someone do them not only does not generate awe or respect for the person doing the mitzvot, it would generate mockery. There's people are just doing silly things, as the Torah said, because the king commanded without any regard to intelligent thought. Further on, the Rambam writes that if the mitzvot are intended to bring us to spiritual perfection, it can't be that we're expected to achieve spiritual perfection by not using our minds, because all our perfection is by way of the mind. Okay, and here in this, the end of this is chapter 31. Rambam writes that there are three basically types of mitzvot that exist. This is from the Schwartz translation. To refine our thoughts, to get rid of incorrect thoughts, to establish truth and fairness, justice, and to remove unfairness, to refine our character traits, and to bring a peaceful and stable society. And Rambam then proceeds over the course of 20-something chapters to explain how each category of mitzvah, and sometimes each mitzvah itself, does these very things, and he assigns each mitzvah to a category, or with a little bit of overlap as well. But his main point is that mitzvot must be purposeful. They're not mindless, rote obeying, but rather they must represent intelligent thought. They must represent purposefulness, because to suggest that mitzvot, as many do, that mitzvot are merely the command of the divine, and you can't and shouldn't seek to know, because it's an insult to God to think that you can understand his actions. But says Rambam, to suggest that God acts in a purposeless manner is in and of itself a huge insult to God.
Hello? Encore.
Excuse me? Was that a question? No question. Okay, let's go on. So Rambam is going to give us explanations to the mitzvot that are not going to be superficial. They are not going to be simplistic. And the problem is that everyone assumes that's exactly what he is doing. That when he gives an explanation of Tamei mitzvot, it means the reason of the mitzvah, or the benefit of the mitzvah, or the cause of the mitzvah. And if you understand that, if you understand him that way, it's not surprising that you're going to think that his explanations are basically valueless. So now, let's go to Rambam Sefer Mitzvot, mitzvah number 3. We are commanded to love God. What does that mean? How does that manifest itself? How do I get to the point where I love God? V'zeh shenachshov v'nitbonen. This is the Ibn Tibon translation. The Kapach translation is nistakel v'nitbonen. Actually, Kapach has 2 different translations: nitbonen v'nistakel. And Ibn Tibon is nitbonen v'naskil. Nachshov v'nitbonen b'mitzvotav u'ma'amarav u'pulotav ad shenasiguhu. We will study his mitzvot and his actions until we understand him, that is God. V'ne'eneh b'hasagato b'tachlit hana'ah v'zoti ha'ava ha'mechuyevet. In the course of achieving this knowledge, it will give us great intellectual pleasure. And this great intellectual pleasure is what we call ahava. And that is what we're commanded to do. Let's think a little bit about what Rambam is telling us to do. We're going to contemplate and study the mitzvot and the actions of God. By actions of God, as Rambam makes clear elsewhere, we're going to look at it, he means the created world. We look at the created world, and everyone knows that Rambam says this. We study the world around us, and we are simply overwhelmed by the details, the perfection. Recently, I watched a documentary, I guess you'd call it, a movie, History of the World in 2 hours, which actually is about an hour and 20 minutes once you get rid of the commercials. And in it, it's just from a physicist's perspective. It's not intended to be religious at all, and it tries to be anti-religious, but it doesn't succeed. Because you look at the physics, the improbability of moving from Big Bang to the world that we have today, where humans can exist and breathe and have an atmosphere and the minerals and elements that are in the earth, all of which is completely improbable or almost impossible. And you cannot but say, Ma Rabu Masech Hashem. So we study the created world and we come to love God. But Rambam, before he gets to the created world, Pu'ulotav, he says we should look at the mitzvot. Now, everyone, and I think I can say everyone, except for Rav Rabinovich and a couple of other Yichidei Zgula, have attempted to explain the word mitzvotav here to mean to study the Torah. That we should concentrate and contemplate and study the Torah, and that will bring us to love of God. The problem is that the command to study the Torah exists independently. It's mitzvat aseh, number 11 in the Sefer HaMitzvot. We already have an independent command to study the Torah. So what is this command that we have here to contemplate the mitzvot? And that will lead us to a love of God. We'll jump ahead, just look at the beginning, the topic heading for Yirat Hashem, the fear of God. We are commanded to believe and have awe and fear of God. Again, that's going to need a manifestation. That's going to need a practical halakha, and we're going to study that. But we're stuck here on b'mitzvotav, and the pasuk, the proof text for Ahavat Hashem is v'avtat Hashem Elokecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol mo'odecha. How am I supposed to achieve this? Let's take a step back and talk a little bit about philosophy just for a minute. You don't have to tune out. Just bear with me. This is for the people who have actually studied classic philosophy. Sadya Gaon has a different approach to the Tamei Mitzvot. And as I said last week, or was it 2 weeks ago? Probably both. To a large degree, Rambam in his Sefer Mitzvot is arguing on Sadya's Sefer Mitzvot, which we now have the text, which until about 4 months ago we didn't. So for Sadya Gaon, the reason for the mitzvot are to achieve perfected actions. A classic philosopher would say Sadya Gaon was following a Platonic philosophy, Neoplatonic philosophy, where the purpose of all the religious enterprise is to bring us to perfected actions. And perfection of the soul as an end unto itself. Rambam is famously more of an Aristotelian, and he is going after a value-based system. The difference between values and perfection we'll leave to the philosophers. But Rambam is definitely looking for a value-based system. We strive to have proper values, which is a godly perfection, and the whole idea is to be imitating God to the best of our abilities. Let's look back at the other source. No, wrong one. Sorry. Let's go to here. No. We want to go to here. Hilchot Yisodei Torah. Here in his Sefer Halacha, the Rambam, very much the beginning. Basically, the first actionable mitzvah is Avat Hashem, because the mitzvah of believing that there is a God is not in and of itself particularly actionable. But here we have the mitzvah to love God, Ve'echi derech lavato lirato, b'sha'ah she'yitbonen ha'adam b'ma'asav u'bru'av ha'nifla'im ha'gedolim, v'yir'eh mehen chokhmato she'ein la'erech v'lo ketz miyad, hu ohev u'meshabeach u'mufeh u'metaber tava gdola li'ed Hashem ha'gadol. That we, in the course of our study of the created world and all its amazing intricacies, we will inevitably come to appreciate the wonder that is the creation and the God that created the creation, and we will have a tremendous love for God. And what's missing here is the mitzvot. He says, here he's telling us we need to contemplate God's actions. In other words, his creations. He says, Masav ubruav. Where are the mitzvot that in the Sefer Mitzvot, he told us we need to be concentrating first and foremost on the mitzvot. Well, so what's going on here? We need to explain this. And to do that, I want to open Moreh Nevuchim and study Moreh Nevuchim in a way that has not been studied properly. And one thing we know about Rambam and his whole pedagogic enterprise, especially in the Moreh Nevuchim, is that even though he's not writing esoterically, there are no secrets, but much of what he writes is hidden. It's there, but you need to tease it out. You need to jump around in the book. It's not written systematically and linearly because he's intending it for advanced scholars. Okay, but occasionally, if you look really carefully, you can find his gems hidden in plain sight. So here, hidden in plain sight, near the end of the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam gives it all away. And here it is, I'm going to show it to you. It's near the middle of chapter 49 in section 3. And I think I can enlarge this. He's talking about the laws, particularly he's talking about the laws of Yibum and the laws of the Motzi Shemra, and he's talking about how wonderful and just these laws are. And then out of nowhere, he drops this on us. Every word matters here. Let's look at this. Hitpalel efo, hitpa'alut rabba, mechochmat dinav yitala, kamo she'ata mitpa'el mechochmat yitzirotav. Rambam wants us to be as overwhelmed by the perfection of the divine law as we become overwhelmed by our studying of the divine creation. In other words, we should look at the mitzvot and be blown away by their perfection, which I'm rather sure exactly is what he's telling us at the beginning of mitzvah number 3. Nistakel v'nitbonen b'mitzvotav. He doesn't mean to study Yoreh De'ah until you know it well enough to pass the test. That's not what he's talking about. That's mitzvah number 11. He's talking about an overview of the mitzvot. He's talking about an appreciation for the perfection of the mitzvah system. As the pasuk says, Hatzur tamim pa'olo ki kol derachav mishpat. Hatzur being God. His actions are perfect, and his laws are perfect justice. Hu omer shekishem sheyitzirotav betachlit hashleimut. Just like his creation is perfected, kach dinav betachlit hayosher. Aval sichleinu einam mesugalim lasig et shleimuto shekol ma sheyatzar ve'et yoshro shekol ma shehudan. Let's admit that just like we will never master the physics of the universe, we're never going to truly master the perfection of the laws. But within our range of skills, כשם שאנו משיגים חלק מנפלאות יצירותיו באיברי בעלי החיים ובתורות הגלגלים, just like we can gain an appreciation even if we don't have a perfected understanding by looking at the movement of the limbs of animals or just your own little fingers and the planets and the perfection of their orbits and the perfection of gravity, the way that keeps everything just in the perfect place, so too we can gain an appreciation for the divine wisdom even without necessarily having the ability to master it. כן אנו משיגים את יושרם של חלק מדיניו. הנסתר מפנינו בשני התחומים גם יחד מרובה בהרבה מאוד מן הגלוי. אך נחזור למטרת הפרק. And he says, no, let's go back and we're going to talk about the Isurei Arayot. So this paragraph is this little comment that has no place here. As he himself admits, when he finishes saying it, he says, no, I got to go back to my topic. In the middle of nowhere, Rambam drops on us. In the middle of nowhere, Rambam drops on us the secret that he wasn't telling us earlier. That the king. Wait a second. Am I mute? Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so like the Nachum v'nitbonen b'mitzvotav, Rambam is clearly saying to us, we need to study the mitzvot as a generality, not to study the mitzvot in order to know the details and perform them. Of course, we have to do that, but that's not what he's talking about here. I would like to explain why this is so important, why I think we need to study this. And I'm going to explain to you what Rambam's whole system of the Tamei Mitzvot is all about. I'll choose an example. Rather famously, Ramban is very, very upset with Rambam about his explanation about korbanot. Rambam writes that everyone knows that Rambam writes that really we have no need for korbanot either. But because as a concession to mankind's weakness, we need to do something, and there's no way God could have said to the people, don't have a physical something to do. They were raised in a world of idolatry. God needed to give them something to do to wean them off the idolatry. And Ramban is very, very upset because says Ramban, are you telling me that mitzvot, that the mitzvot of korbanot, which actually occupy almost 50% of the mitzvot in the Torah, are not objectively important and good? And therefore he rejects everything that Rambam writes on the subject. Rambam would answer Ramban, of course they're objectively good. But their objective good is not what you think it is. The objective good, and he says it, but people don't realize that that's what he's saying. The objective good of having the korbanot is the giving us something to wean us off avodah zarah. Because that is a central element of what God is trying to do for us. Because avodah zarah in all its forms, and when we say avodah zarah, we don't mean just idol worship. We mean superstitions. We mean skulot. We mean astrology, in all its forms. All the avodah zarah, all the untruths, all the amulets, all the emunot tefillot. And Rambam says a number of times in the Morah that half of the Torah exists, the mitzvot in the Torah, to wean us off idolatry, paganism, superstitions. And let's not fool ourselves. These pagan superstitions and amulets and all those other things in skulot and little red strings and all the other silly stuff that goes with it and praying to dead rabbis, it's with us today. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's not going anywhere. And says the Rambam, half the Torah is devoted to weaning us off those incorrect beliefs. Because for as long as we hold on to those incorrect beliefs, they are an impediment to our achieving correct beliefs. That's a central mitzvah. So says Rambam, God had to give us korbanot as a way of weaning us, as one of the tools to wean us off the avodah zarahs that are alive and well today. This is just one example where Rambam's explanation was misunderstood as being practical and prosaic. And what Rambam was really saying in his Tamei Mitzvot is look at the big picture. He's not talking about the practical, the applicable prosaic reasons for doing the mitzvah. When Rambam is talking about Tamei Mitzvot, he's talking about the intent of the legislator, the divine intent, not the practical subjective benefit. I saw one writer who basically called the Tamei Mitzvot a means of achieving efficacy in our performance of the mitzvot. He means efficacy on a theological level. He's not being simplistic. He's saying by giving us the Tamei Mitzvot, we can get a shortcut to understanding what it is that God wants us to do. But that's not what Rambam's saying. Rambam's looking at a very much the meta issue, the very big picture. Why do the mitzvot exist? What big idea is represented by the mitzvot? So just to pick another example. Yeah, first of all, yes, there are some mitzvot where the tamei mitzvot are practical. Okay? I'll give one example I think we can all agree on. Tefillin. The pasuk on the command for tefillin, it says that, why do we have the mitzvah? Man tiyeh Torat Hashem b'ficha, right? And then it is very much, tefillin are a symbol and a reminder of the great miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim, to the extent that Ramban writes that if you don't think about the miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim and how God took his people out of Mitzrayim and created a new nation, you're not yotzei the mitzvah of tefillin. Sometimes the tamei mitzvot, especially when they're spelled out in the pasuk, are very much simple, prosaic, and symbolic. But just to give an example, when Rambam writes about the mitzvah of the Arba Minim, that how wonderful it is that God chose 4 species that are common and generally available in Eretz Yisrael at that time of year, he's not saying that that's why we have the mitzvah of those 4 species for the Arba Minim, but rather what he's saying is we should be appreciating the divine wisdom that he gave us 4 species that are common and available in Eretz Yisrael during that time of year. Not that that's why we have them, but that is a gift of God that we have them, those species. And if I could add on my own, and I think I'm right about this, but I never saw this in writing elsewhere, is that if you look at the 4 species, you'll notice that they seem to grow in 4 different parts of the country. In order to acquire the Arba Minim, you need to gather the species from all around the country. And that's in some way a unifying theme for Chag HaSukkot, but that's not what we're talking about anyway. So the purpose of the Tamei Mitzvot, according to Rambam, as opposed to what everyone thinks he's talking about, it's not the efficacy of ritual practice, and it's the legislative intent, the legislative purpose of the mitzvot. I want to prove it further. Okay. Let's prove it further. If we look at the structure of the 3rd section of Moreh Nevuchim, the second half of the book, we'll find that the structure of the book is the following. The first 15 chapters are about the created world, how the world works, how it's governed by God, including but not limited to the ideas of hashgacha, how God supervises on a micro and a macro level. It is then followed by this large section of Tamei Mitzvot, and then the short summary chapters on human worship and love of God. If we think about it, I'd like to argue that that structure exactly follows what Rambam is saying in the Sefer Mitzvot. He opens with a study of the created world. He then has long chapters on the Tamei HaMitzvot, and he finishes with Ahavat Hashem. And in his finish on Ahavat Hashem, he combines Ahavat Hashem with worship of Hashem. What I'd like to argue is that exactly parallels what Rambam has done here in the Sefer HaMitzvot. And I'd like to argue, secondarily, that when Rambam talks about the worship of God, the worship of God, for the most part, is falls into the category of Yirat Hashem. And I'd like to try to prove that. What just happened? I did not mean to do that. Okay, there we go. Okay. 1 second. Whoever's eating out there, turn off your mic. Anyway, I want to talk just a bit about Avat Hashem and Yirat Hashem. I'd like to argue, and this will take a few minutes, but I think it's worth it. I'd like to argue that Ahavat Hashem and Yirat Hashem very much directly parallel the philosophical elements and the practical elements of the worship of God. To some degree, it parallels the idea of the mitzvot aseh and the mitzvot lo taseh, but not strictly, and we don't want to get caught up in the details. But conceptually, I think I can prove that for Rambam, Yirat Hashem is the performance of the mitzvot. And Ahavat Hashem is the contemplation of God, the metaphysics of the world. I'd like to show it to you. Let's get rid of this page and let's go back to the Moreh. I would like to show it to you in his own words. Here. So we're at the end of the third section of the Musar-Avicha. We're in chapter 52 of the 54 chapters in the third section. And he's going to explain to us how the perfected man behaves. Ein yeshivato shel adam, tznuotav, vasiotav, sha'a shehu levado beveito ki yeshivato, tznuotav, vasiotav, sha'a shehu lefnei melech gadol. A man does not behave in the privacy of his own home the way he behaves in public. Certainly not the way he behaves when he's standing before an important king. Ein diburo v'alizoto sha'a shehu bein b'nei beito u'krovei mishpachto ki diburo b'moshav hamelech. And a man who's sitting among his family, joking around and having idle talk, is not the way a person talks when he's standing before a king. And the point that Rambam is making is that when a person is sufficiently theologically developed, Yasim alibo v'yeda sha'melech hagadol ha'ofef oto v'atzamud elav tamid gadol mikol prat shehu mibnei ha'adam afilu yezeh David u'Shlomo. Rambam is saying that the perfected individual eventually brings himself to understanding that he is constantly in the presence of God. And as such, he will start to behave accordingly. And he will find that got to turn the page. He will find that his behavior, and here the Rambam gives very specific examples, that the Chacham, he doesn't see himself imagining as if he is before God, but he actually feels that he is before God. And therefore, even his most private behaviors, his bathroom behavior, his sexual behavior, is going to be inherently tsanua because he is conscious that he is before God at all times. Rambam then develops the idea that that person is going to talk differently because he is aware that he is before God and God is listening in. Or another way of understanding the pasuk that he's bringing here, he understands that he is before God and therefore he's just not going to talk shtuyot because he's standing before God. And he brings a pasuk from Dvarim. Im lo tishmor lasot et kol divrei haTorah azot haktuvim b'sefer zeh liyirat Hashem hanichbad v'hanoah hazeh et Adonai Elohecha. And I want to turn the page again. I don't generally like quoting myself, but I think this one's pretty good. Up here in the scribble on top. There is a ever-rising spiral, intertwined dual helix of ahava and yir'ah. That as someone goes up the level of ahava, he perforce needs to go up the level in yir'ah. And as he goes up levels in yir'ah, he perforce is going up in levels of ahava. And it needs to be that way. And the Rambam explains that someone who is becoming closer and closer to God through his working on himself, on his avat Hashem, he needs the contrabalance of Yirat Hashem, because otherwise he starts getting the idea that he's Hashem's buddy. He needs the Yirat Hashem to push him back a little and to remind him, not so close. As much as you'd like to be close, you can't possibly be close. But as he goes up levels of Yirat Hashem, he is automatically going up levels of Ahavat Hashem simultaneously. And this is truly the penultimate chapter of the Musar-Avicha, where Rambam is bringing you to the point where he's saying, you have achieved human intellectual perfection. You are as close to godliness as you could possibly be. And now you need to start behaving that way. People think that Rambam is a pure, disengaged elitist, that you just want to be like God and that's it. But for Rambam, being like God, first and foremost, primarily means behaving in a godly fashion. And that manifests itself in tzedek, mishpat, and chesed. But that's a completely different shiur, what Rambam means by those ideas. But again, I'll quote myself, Ahava is dveikut l'Hashem, and yirah is hidrachakut. And they need to work together. They could not possibly be independent. And Rambam, in the continuation, you'll just have to take my word for it temporarily, Rambam is saying that the mitzvot, and he says it overtly, I say it overtly over here, but right there, that line over there. But Rambam says it overtly, that the mitzvot, the practical, applicable act of doing mitzvot, that is in the realm of Yirat Hashem. And Avat Hashem is a contemplative act. It's a philosophical thing. And they need each other. You cannot have a situation, and Rambam says it very, very clearly, you cannot have a situation where you think you've achieved philosophical perfection and you don't need to do the mitzvot. He's very aware of the very real danger of going there. Rambam has this tendency at the end of every section of his books to do a recapitulation of the philosophical elements in the book. The last of the mitzvot, lo taseh, in the Sefer HaMitzvot, Rambam chooses for the last mitzvah the law of the kings, that he's not allowed to have many wives, horses, or money. And Rambam goes off on a little bit of a philosophical discourse on Lo Yarbeh Lo Susim, talking about how Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all men, failed. Because he thought that because he knew the reason for the mitzvah, he didn't need to keep the mitzvah. And Shlomo HaMelech says, don't worry, I won't become egotistical. I won't go back to Mitzrayim. I will not lose my mind to women. I will allow myself, because I have protecting myself by my philosophical attainments. I know what the ta'amei mitzvot are, and therefore I am inoculated against the damages I'll accumulate horses, I'll accumulate money, I'll accumulate wives. And he failed in all three. Says Rambam, that's a very real danger. You cannot give yourself a patur for the performance of mitzvot because you think that you have studied the mitzvot. There is no such patur. You need to be fully engaged in the act of doing the mitzvot, but you also need to be fully engaged in the philosophy of the mitzvot. You need the ahava and the yirah in each and every mitzvah as we do them. So let's review. Ram started in the third mitzvah of the Sefer HaMitzvot, which is the first of the practical mitzvot, where you have to do something, and even that is something of an abstraction, to love God. And Rambam says, how are you going to love God? You're going to study the natural world, and you're going to study the mitzvot. And you're going to see the wisdom of God in the created world, and you're going to see the wisdom of God in the religious world. And they're forever intertwined, inseparable. They complement each other. And as you engage with both, if you're philosophically inclined, you need to work on Yirat Hashem. And if you are Yirat Hashem inclined, you need to work on your philosophical side. You can't simply devote yourself to the practical mitzvot and not engage in the philosophy, because if you do that, you will always have the Maaseh mitzvah, but you'll never have the Kiyum mitzvah. You'll never make yourself a perfected individual simply doing things. You need to know why you're doing things, and you need to understand the underlying principles for why those commands exist. It's not a simple subject. And if we were to sit and go through the Rambam's Tamei Mitzvot, we will see, and obviously we don't have dozens of hours to do it, dozens and dozens of hours. If we go through it, we'll see that this is what the Rambam is doing systematically. He is not giving us the tools for the personal benefits of the mitzvot. He's not giving the tools to make the mitzvot more effective or efficient. He's giving us the tools to understand the big picture, what God is trying to accomplish in the world, and how the mitzvot are fulfilling God's desire for how the world should look. And for us, in our daily performance of the mitzvot, we need to have that in mind. And when we are contemplating God, we also need to be engaging in the practical mitzvot as well. I'm exhausted. Mark, please get this thing posted on the YouTube as soon as possible, because I think I learned a lot in the last 45 minutes, and I think I personally want to review it, and I think these are things that we need to review on an ongoing basis to understand what we're doing in our mitzvot and why we're doing them. Well,
thank you very much. I'm sure we all learned a lot. And yes, I've been recording. I will get it posted.
Thank you. Bye. Erev Tov.
Thank you.
So,
David Brownstein, you out there?
I am indeed.
Call me, because we have to have a conversation we didn't have on Thursday.